Hey there, it's Vincent, and I am back with part 2 of Let's Blend a Musket. Now in this part we will be finishing off the modelling we started in the first part, so that is the Flintlock mechanism itself, and some added details to the handle. So without any further ado, let's go into Blender and finish off our Flintlock pistol model. Right, okay, so we're going to go into side view now. And we're gonna start making this side a bit flatter. As you can see, there's like a metal plate, and this is where the flintlock mechanism will go. So this is gonna be one of the hardest parts, is flattening off this side here. So I'm just gonna move this loop down because it works out better for me. Then we are gonna actually delete these faces, and we are gonna sort of construct our own shape for the metal plate that will go here. Now we need to add a loop in here because we can't just delete the whole face. As you can see, that it only goes up to that point. So I think about there is good. Then that allows us to keep the other important part of the model as well. So we can delete that half now and go a bit further down as well. Now we're going to start constructing the side. So we're just going to select this vertex, extrude it out, and we're sort of going to manually do the side ourselves. This is when modelling can get quite hard but also quite fun, because really you're doing everything yourself. You're not importing a shape, you're just working with single vertices. We'll just delete that one as well. Now I want this one to go flat along the bottom, but you can see that it goes underneath. So we're going to have to move this up now. Move all the others around it as well. And just remember, when you're doing modelling like this, it helps just to look at the reference image again, so you don't just go off track. Just keep on looking at it and making sure that you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. This bit here curves round. Just move those to make it a bit smoother. And this bit comes down here. I'm trying to line up the vertices with the seams that are already in the model, and you'll see why in a minute. Really, extruding is one of the most useful tools in Blender. I use it the most. It's really helpful for anything really. So now we're going to attach the part we made to the rest of the model. So very simple, you're just selecting the vertices of the rest of the model and the bit we made and making a face out of it. Now we need to add a vertex in the middle here, because remember before how I said that these need to line up with the loops in the model, and this is because because when we're joining it to the rest of the model, they'll just be right next to it, and we can easily create an edge that will join the two things together. One important thing to remember when you're making your own faces is that you should never exceed 4 sides, 5 at the most, because If I just selected the whole edge there and made it one face, it would look terrible, and I'd have no control of where the edges would be, and it would be a big mess. So try and do triangles, but if you can't do triangles, use squares. And this process might look really easy to you, and that's because I've kept certain rules. I've put the vertices right next to where they should be, and so it all lines up nicely. And we just need to smooth it now, and it should look quite nice. There's an error there with the normals, just hit recalculate and it'll fix it for you. I think that looks quite nice. So now what we're going to do is select this loop here. Blender already detects it as a loop, and we're going to extrude it into the model. This is where a bit of the wood would be carved out and the metal casing would be put in. So we are just moving it inside the model using the fattening tool, and that allows us to offset it into the center. You can't just use scaling for something like this. You have to actually offset it inside, and that's Alt S to do that. Now we want it to come out a bit, so we're just going to move that inside, so you can see there's kind of a gap in between, just to get that extra detail on the model. Okay, so now we need to make this thing we've made on the side into a face. So it's the same as before, just selecting 3 or 4 sides and making a face out of it. There's something called topology, and basically what that means is your vertices and edges flow with the shape of the model. So you can see that I'm trying to keep them relatively where they should be, and the reason for this is, one, it'll make your model look a lot nicer with a shader applied, and two is that when you're animating, everything should work as it should do. So if your vertices are flowing with the model, then your animations will be perfect. I just missed a bit out there. And now if we flatten it, this makes it look like a hard surface. So instead of the wood, this is now the metal part. Now what we're going to do is move the model out of the way and start by doing the flintlock mechanism you can see here. So I'm just starting by adding in a plane. Now if we delete those, we can work with these single vertices. So it's similar to what we did before. We are just looking at the reference image, extruding and grabbing the vertices so that we can get the general shape of what we see. So it's just a really easy way to do this. It's the reference image is right in front of you. All you have to do is line up the points with what you see. And this bit is where the flint will be held, and we're going to leave out the screw that you see there because we're going to make that into a separate object. Another advantage of using a reference image, which I'm not going to do in this tutorial, is you can, if you keep the shape generally the same, you can actually use the reference image as a texture, and you know, because you've modeled it to fit, that the texture will work perfectly. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do all the textures myself, because to be honest, it's a bit of a cheat way, and I want to show you the proper way of doing texturing. Now we're going to do this gap in the middle that I forgot about. Just made a quick circle there. Moving the vertices to fit. Okay, and now we are going to start putting a face on this. So the same as you saw before, we're just selecting 3 or 4 sides, hitting F to make a face. Really fast, just working your way up the model. Now you can see that the edges I'm generating are keeping with the general flow of the model, which is what I was talking about before, topology. Really fast, simple as you see it really, no tricks to it. Okay, and now we've made that into a solid face. What we need to do now is give it some depth. So just select the whole thing. Careful not to select the gun like I just did. So hit L to select that, and E to extrude along the y-axis, and that just gives it some depth. Smooth it, and that looks pretty good. Now we're just going to move it into position with the metal plate, and now we're going to do like the adjusting screw that sits in the hammer, which is what this part is called. This is called the hammer, and it holds the flint, and when the hammer hits the frizzen, which is the other part, it will generate a spark which will ignite the gunpowder and shoot the bullet. That's just a quick explanation of what a flintlock is. You don't really need to know that. So yeah, I only chose 4 sides for this cylinder, and that's because it is so small that you'll hardly notice it. Extruding and scaling, just a really easy way to add detail to the model at a low poly cost. Now we just move that into position with the model. You can see that it's slightly thicker, so we're gonna have to make it fit. If we make it slightly thicker, then that'll work. Then we just select both and move it away from the model. Okay, so that is the hammer completed. Now we're going to move on to the pan and the frizzen. So just plop a vertex there. I just duplicated one from the other model, and same process, just extruding, moving it along the side. We'll just subdivide that edge just to get that curve there. Subdividing is basically adding a vertex in between 2 points, and it adds more detail to the model and it makes it look smoother. But if you use it in the right way, you can just add in one vertex on the same edge, which is what I did there. So I'm going to subdivide again because I forgot to add a point in there. So just hitting subdivide adds a vertex right in between those two. Same as what I did here. So we're gonna make a face here, same as the other one. It might be tempting just to select the whole edge and hit F to make one face, but you shouldn't do that. Just try and make it the same thickness as the hammer. Smooth it. Little graphical error there, just recalculate the normals, and Bob's your uncle. Now you can see that there are screws holding these in place. I'm just going to do this with a cylinder. Same as before, only need 4 sides. Rotate it to face you on the x-axis. Move it into position. If we go into top view for this one, we can see where it needs to be. So it needs to go into the model itself for a tiny bit, and we're just going to smooth this off with some extruding and scaling to get like a rounded end. For the last bit, just Alt M to merge it into one vertex. Then you'll want to smooth it and duplicate it for the frizzen. It's a bit smaller on this, so we are going to scale it on everything but the Y, otherwise it will get shorter, which it isn't, it's the same length. So just hit Shift Y. Now that everything's done, we can move the gun back into position. I just use GZ2 so I know exactly where to put it back to. And you can see that these are out of place because I did the this bit on the side a bit by myself. So obviously I'll have to move these into the right place. and that looks good. Looks good to me. Now there was one extra bit of detail I wanted to get into the model, and that was the bit on the end of the handle that you can see in the reference image, like the gold bit there. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're doing quite a lot of this episode, manually modeling the objects, because in the first episode we just got in a cylinder and worked from that, but here we are doing it ourselves purely from vertices that we put in. So now we've got the shape of it, we need to curve it around the handle, which can be quite hard. So if we just move the handle into place, go into top view, and then we can move these points at a certain distance from the model. So we can get it to curve round. So at this view we can clearly see how far they need to be from the model. Make sure you do the same to both sides, because the handle is curved the same way all the way around. Also the fact that we're going to be mirroring this, just doing some final adjustments. This bit can take quite a while, as you can see, but we're nearly there. And I think that's almost finished. It's quite nicely curved around the handle. Okay, now we're finished the shape of it. We can now do what we've been doing before, which is making the faces. Make sure you smooth that. For the bottom part, it's quite easy. We're just going to be duplicating the bottom of the handle and increasing the size using the fattening tool to offset it from the surface of the handle. Merge those, and then we can just start the same process, which is joining these two meshes together. So we are just going to be modelling one half of the handle, and then if we duplicate it and flip it round, we can stick it on the other side as well. I've got a bad throat today, if you're wondering what the coughing's about. Okay, so that looks pretty nice. Now we are going to delete the other half of this dome we've got at the bottom, because we won't be needing it. So if we hit L to select all of it, and then C for circle select, then if you middle click, that deselects everything that you don't want to delete. You don't have to do it this way, I just found it quicker. So now if we delete that, we're left with half of it. Now we're going to do the cursor based scaling now. If we set it to exactly the middle, then hit the cursor, that means when we scale it by -1, there you can see that it's exactly flipped to the other side. And make sure you recalculate the normals, because they'll be facing the other way if you scaled it -1. Now I don't really like this face here. It's a bit it's got a bit of a hard edge, and also these two didn't correctly delete when I hit remove doubles. So make sure when you've scaled it on the Y by -1, you remove all the doubles, and that is because we want the two sides to become one mesh, and because we mirrored it, they'll be in exactly the same place. So make sure you remove the doubles after that part. And we're gonna rebuild this face manually, because I think I topologized it wrong, and so the shader didn't work very well. So now you can see that I've redone it. The topology is better and the shading's better. Just do the same on the other side, and it's worked. So now we need to get the edge here and push it into the model to give it some depth, because at the minute it's just floating around the handle. So if we extrude it and scale it in, and that works quite nicely. You can see it inside the model now. And I think that's worked pretty well. Now the final part I want to do is just to add one of these screws to it, because it looks like it needs to be kept in place. So if we select that and just make it a bit shorter, and then we can move it into position. That looks rather nice. Now the final step is doing the same as we did with the bit before. We're just flipping it to the other side using the cursor based scaling, and then we just scale it on the Y by -1. Move it into position before we duplicate it. Now we don't need to remove doubles because they're not touching. And that is the model finished. Thank you for watching. The next part I think will be animating, and after that we'll be doing the texturing. So stay tuned for part 3 of making a musket in Blender. Make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.